Right. Well, thank you, Kate, and particular thanks to Jaap or Professor Seidel for excellent introduction to this topic, and for setting the scene entirely for the entire symposium. So thank you very much. So I'm today actually going to start by delving into a little bit more detail on those topics that came up during Professor Seidel's presentation. And in particular, I'm going to talk around nutrient density. So, as a wee bit of a recap, what we're looking at is, as Professor Seidel said, improved outcomes really through dietary habits. And I'm not saying dietary intervention, I'm deliberately saying dietary habits because I think it is all about creating good and healthy dietary habits. And part of that is, of course, associated with the appropriate nutrition. And in there, we're looking to deliver great nutrient, but for relatively low calories. Some of the issues that people have with some of the non-communicable diseases are definitely related to calorific intake. So nutrient-rich, lower energy and quality diets, and they are diets, and must encompass a variety of foods. Certainly not just fruit and vegetables, but we do need whole grains. We need protein sources and an entire variety, a balanced, healthy diet. One of the negative aspects of modern day, as has already been referred to, is this ease of availability to particularly low-cost foods, and often they're energy dense. And by energy dense, I mean that they're high energy. So in terms of a concentration, if you think of a concentration, you can have something and it's got a lot of energy in it and you don't need to eat very much and you get a lot of calories, versus an energy these lights are destroying me a wee bit, versus a food that's not energy dense, where you can eat quite a lot of it and you don't get as many calories. So often there's a correlation with these foods where they're less nutrient rich because they've been highly processed, and the processing of them, the refinement of foods, which often will make them more delicious and more attractive and more economic, also reduces the nutrient value of the foods. So we're eating delicious foods that are not very nutrient, they're not contributing a lot to our nutrient complement. They're filling us up with a lot of energy, and overall they're just associated with this increasing rate of non-communicable diseases, diabetes, obesity, and everything else like that. So in saying all of that, basically what we're looking at is the overall quality of the diet, the nutritional quality of the diet, and that is a critical element. So that's the overview. How do we actually judge this? And that's the critical part. We've got a range of interested parties, all of whom are sort of going, well, how do we know if a diet's good? We've got consumers, we've got governments, we've got health professionals. What makes a food good, and how do we judge it? So one of the tools that we have at our disposal is looking at the totality of the diet and the nutrients that are in there. And this has been reduced to a science, so it's called the science of nutrient profiling. And nutrient profiling has actually been developed for a number of reasons. One of the key reasons is to provide an overview of foods, to be able to rank foods. It's not so much are they good or are they bad, because there's a spectrum of the value of foods or the nutritional quality of foods. But it does allow us to rank foods. It then allows comparisons, and often the comparisons, you'll see today later in my presentation, I'm using some comparative figures, and that's really just to explain some detail, but it does allow comparisons. It potentially enables consumers to make the right food choices. I would dare to suggest that nutrient profiling is a tool behind the scenes. I think it's a tool, the details of nutrient profiling and actually what it means are often too complex for consumers. Consumers prefer a more simple approach. And that's often, that's a challenge for many people when they're trying to put traffic light systems on foods or simple to easy to recognise indicators for consumers or as to whether a food should be consumed in high amounts, low amounts, or potentially sort of not at all. Behind those systems for consumers sits nutrient profiling. So I guess ultimately it is for consumers, but it's not necessarily a direct consumer tool. One of the virtues of the nutrient profiling system, and we'll see this a little bit later, is it also allows authorities to make some recommendations, not only around food selection, but to screen tools. And one of the examples I've got is how it can be used if you want to make a health claim on a food. I've got the Australia and New Zealand example, which we'll have a quick look at. And that allows us to say, this food meets certain criteria, it's suitable, you can attach a health claim to it. You can promote this food as having, great health properties. Foods that don't meet that criteria, you can't. So nutrient profiling, as I say, it is a science, it's a recognised discipline, and it's really used to try and inform us about foods and where they sit in the spectrum for food choice. So if we go back and just step back to some of the terminology that's been used this morning, what is energy density, and how what does it actually mean, and how can we explain it? So in science terms, it's basically a measure of the energy or the calorific value of a food within a defined quantity. So that defined quantity could be a given weight, it could be, and that might be a serve size, or it could be a given volume, depending on what the food is. Foods are these are some general guidelines that give people cut-offs to say this is high energy, low energy, or medium energy. So a low energy food, and some of these units that you go, well, how much is a gram? And it's a very small amount. So, if you wanted to convert it maybe to 100 grams, which is a more recognisable size, 1.5 kilocalories per gram is 150 kilocalories per 100 grams. And 100 grams is often sort of around a serve size, half a serve size in some instances. Moderate energy density is up to twice that level, and high energy density is over 300 kilocalories per grams. I've actually put up here quite specifically, usually when people talk about energy density, they have a lovely picture of a burger up there with sort of oozing meat dripping in fat and sauces and everything else. But today we're actually here talking predominantly about fruit, and you can't, and often fruit and vegetables are lumped together in the same pack. In fact, down in the matrix there of healthy foods and potentially low energy density foods, we've got a mixture of fruit and veggies. So my high energy density is in fact one that is, people say, well, look, that's great food. I've got servings of lovely deep fried potatoes there. I've got some guacamole and I've got it all wrapped up in a taco that's got some whole grains in it. Chances are that's actually quite a high energy dense serving of vegetables and maybe a fruit. So it's a little bit like the slide that Jaap had where there were the fruits that were high in sugars and those that were a wee bit low in sugars. A lot of these things aren't necessarily black and white and just saying, oh, it's a vegetable, therefore it must be good. Well, really a daily serve of thin, deep-fried potato strips that have a very low, or have an extremely high surface area to volume ratio where most of that surface area is fat. It is a serving of vegetables, and quite legitimately. And many people will say, well, I'm doing quite well. I've had a serving of vegetables. But that will actually be an incredibly energy dense and nutritionally devoid, virtually, food, delicious as they are. So as a part of this, I think it's actually really important to understand that these criteria for energy dense and nutrient things, they're not black and white. There's a spectrum, and foods do sit within that. So that's the energy density. So it's a measure of how much energy, how many calories on a given volume or weight. Nutrient density, on the other hand, can be measured as a quantum of specific nutrients, such as protein, maybe some fat, sodium, vitamins, other minerals. And it's per quantum of a food. And that quantum can be, again, on a weight basis. It can be on a serve size basis. Or more usefully, it can be on an energy basis. And hopefully you'll understand why an energy basis is perhaps the most appropriate tool to use, but of course that makes it even more complex for consumers to understand. So probably in the last 20 years particularly, when there's been this increased interest in the nutritional quality of foods, a number of nutrient models or nutrient density models have in fact been developed. One of the highlights, and probably should have had this last line in bold, because it's incredibly important, and I do think it supports what Professor Seidel was saying, that consistently fruits and vegetables, most fruits and vegetables which are low in energy density, French fries and deep fried vegetables aside, consistently rank highly in all these nutrient profiling models. And that is a really important underlying message. The models have been developed, as I've already referred to, to enable comparison between foods and different properties of foods. And within that, we have a model that was specifically developed back in 2005 that looked at fruit and vegetables. And why it looked at fruit and vegetables was specifically because of the spectrum of different qualities of fruits and vegetables. So it enabled fruits and vegetables to be compared. At that time, it was based on a range of 16 nutrients, some of the fundamental nutrients, proteins and fats, and then vitamins and minerals. And it was looked at in two ways. It was looked at the nutritional adequacy, and that was defined of how much of a nutrient is there as a proportion of its recommended daily amount. So the recommended daily amounts are intakes that are recommended by authoritative agencies. So most countries, most jurisdictions will have some either daily values that are as recommended intakes, recommended daily intakes. They're all called slightly different things. Basically they mean you should have 60 milligrams of vitamin C a day to be healthy, that sort of thing. So nutrient adequacy is a measure of how much of a nutrient in the food is there as a proportion of what's recommended. And for the nutrient adequacy score for fruits and vegetables, this was 16 nutrients. You got the average of them, of their daily intake requirements, and then divided by 16 and came up with a score. The same model took that score and looked at it as a function of the energy density. So this makes it a very useful concept. And in the paper that was actually was quite interesting because these same authors were referenced in Professor Seidel's work too. So they're very famous for this work. They also developed it to look at price ratios, and so you're buying something and it's nutrient dense, but it comes at a cost, or it's nutrient dense and it's at a reasonable cost. I'm not going to go into that cost in this instance today. So I think this is a graph that you'll probably have, that you do have in your packs. And using this 2005 model for fruits and vegetables, Kiwifruit consistently score in an outstanding way. Sun Gold Kiwifruit has a score of nearly 19, and people often go, wow, these are, in comparison to things like apples and oranges, these are excessive scores. What is the explanation for these? In many ways, in this model, this is underpinned by the extremely high by the high vitamin C content of kiwi fruit. So in a specific amount of kiwi fruit, you get more than your daily intake. So your proportion is greater than 1. I have 2 kiwi fruit up here, and the reason I have 2 green kiwi fruit up here is not to confuse you. When we're doing these models, and in any of this work, it's absolutely critical that you use accepted data. So this is not me making numbers up. It's not Darman and Darman making numbers up. What we do is we source from published and reviewed compositional databases the nutrient contents of these fruits, vegetables, and different foods. So in every major country, you'll have such a database. In America, the database is administered by the USDA, and it's freely available. It's a wonderful online tool, and it goes into great detail about all the nutrients in foods. It doesn't just cover the major fruit nutritional entities, but it goes right down to fatty acid profiles and everything else like that. But these are validated databases, are statistically driven, the samples, right? In New Zealand, we have New Zealand food composition tables. Australia have some food composition tables. Europe has food composition tables. And so these composition tables are the tools that you use to extract this data. So going back to why have we got 2 green kiwi fruit? Because all of this data, including Zespri Sun Gold data, is extracted from the USDA database. The USDA database has numbers for green kiwi fruit, but Zespri also has some numbers for green or Hayward kiwi fruit that are in the New Zealand food composition tables, and they differ slightly. So it's an interesting comparison. And I just, for completeness, because I'm a little bit pedantic when it comes to sort of the numbers, I wanted the USDA green kiwi fruit ones up there as a comparison as well to all the others, so to be complete. But I added in the data that Zespri tends to use for its green kiwi fruit. So when you see the data in your packs and you go, well, that wasn't quite the right one, that's why it's there. So you can see here on the nutrient adequacy score, this extremely great performance of kiwi fruit. And these are all done on a 100-gram basis. So nothing to do with serve size, and we're going to look at that a wee bit later, but it's done on a 100-gram basis. That's the nutrient adequacy score. There's that. If we then look at nutrient density, you'll suddenly see on the left-hand axis this calorific quantum arrival, this thing. So these are the data that if we then start looking at what are the number of calories in the fruits, and does that have an impact? And it does have an impact, in fact. You'll see that kiwi fruit still performs really well. You'll see oranges are up there. Now that makes perfect sense because they're extremely high, they're full of water. So this is 100 grams of the fruit and then corrected for calories. Nothing to do with serve size, and serve size just complicates it all over again. Lemons perform really well, and they're a really good example of serve size confounding these things, because most people don't eat a whole lemon. Most people will squeeze a little bit of lemon juice into a drink, or they may use it as a condiment or as a garnish, but people don't normally eat lemons. Some Some cultures actually preserve lemons, and you could say that they have little slices there, but lemons and even cranberries are traditionally used more as a condiment or a small serve. The Americans have addressed that quite nicely. So this is the nutrient density. So kiwifruit still perform exceptionally well. I'm just exceeding myself, I forgot I put that in there. So that's a 2005 model, and it's a perfectly legitimate model, and the thought processes in that model have been really important. They've contributed to a progression of nutrient profiling. And I think that this is an important thing. Science changes, science progresses, people's habits progress, people's understanding of what foods are progress. And as Professor Seidel said, very obviously, dietary changes and dietary patterns, I'm not going to say progress, they change, but maybe the understanding of how those changes are adverse or affecting us progresses. And nutrient profiling, the science of nutrient profiling, is no exception. It has progressed. It's progressed to a state where there's new models putting up, and all of these new models have some fundamental criteria that are associated with them. I've already mentioned that it must be based on published values. This is not something that you just you have your own data and try and plug it in. You actually want to use validated and open source data. So these rules have been developed for the development of nutrient profiling. Also importantly is that it's an open process. The nutrient profile model is open. In other words, the algorithms that are behind the number crunching are published and they're available to people. There's been several models of nutrient profiling where people have seen an opportunity to use it as a commercial, to have it as a commercial opportunity, and they've come out with all sorts of models to try and rank foods and sell this concept to authorities and to food manufacturers, but no one knows quite how the numbers are calculated. So, from a public good sense, it's really important that the algorithms are published. Rather than just a blanket, this is the totality of the nutrients that are in there, our understanding of perhaps the nutrients that are good for us or better or should be encouraged and those that should be discouraged, that understanding has progressed. So the new models are now, and the model I'm going to explain, now looks at this. And ultimately, as I've said before, these models have been designed with the consumer in mind. Ideally, they're consumer friendly. I think that is a wee bit of a whimsical thought because I do think the models are too complex for the average consumer to appreciate. But the information that comes out of them is certainly not. So this is a slide that gives you an overview of the process and around where nutrient profiling is sitting today, and where how they've been developed. So as I said before, it's very clearly gone into this green phase. These are nutrients that we should encourage. There's been a lot of work done that said, well, look, we've got all these vitamins and minerals. Surely they should all be good for us. The reality of it is they are, but you don't have to go into extreme detail. In actual fact, there's a small group of nutrients that if they're present in food, that will tend to drive that food into the positive category. So this simplifies the model, but it retains its robustness. Conversely, there's a small group of nutrients that we should really be looking to limit. Most of you will recognise the fat group. Some models take total fat. We know not all fats are bad. Some just use saturated fats. Others include trans fats. And then sugars. Some models have added sugar. Some models have total sugar. And there's debate around even that in a food. Fruits have sugar. It's not added sugar. And, Professor Seidel will suggest, touched on this topic, often when sugars come in a natural form and they're in the intact whole food, do they have the same effect as the same amount of sugar that's been topped up into something? The consensus is probably they differ. And then looking at the models, do we do it on a weight basis or a volume basis? Do we do it on a calorific basis? Do we do it on a serving size basis? And are there thresholds? What is the score? But ultimately, the models should be tested, and they should be tested robustly, and they should be validated, scientifically validated. So that means that they can be used in a number of scenarios, and you will always get the same answer. So you're not going to get different data, or you won't come to different conclusions when the model is used by different groups. I touched on the New Zealand one, and I wanted to run through this because this also quite nicely addresses the idea of sugars and where foods sit. You're not expected to read this fine print on the left-hand side. It looks quite complicated. In fact, it's not that complicated. In fact, it's a really nice model, but it's not one really for consumers. So this is what I'm saying. Nutrient profiling and nutrient scoring is a complex in itself. In Australia and New Zealand, this is the model that's used to make a judgment call as to whether or not a food can have a health claim. And it's a very nice model. First of all, it splits foods into 3 categories. It splits them into beverages. It splits them into high-fat foods, things like cheese, breads. So that's category 1 and category 3. Oh, I have got them up there. And then category 2 is a bit of a catch-all, but it's an appropriate catch-all, any other foods. So that includes fruit and some vegetables, of course. And it is used as a screening tool. Foods have some baseline points attributed to them, and those baseline points come out of a matrix. So the matrix includes energy, it includes saturated fat, it includes sodium, and it includes, I've forgotten the other, there's one more there. And depending on the level of each of those, you are assigned a score. So Kiwifruit, for example, scores 0 for its sodium content. Oh, it has sugar as the other one. It scores a 1, and the scale for sugar is 1 to 8. So, and it's done on a weight measure. So you can say, well, fruits have got sugar, and a lot of the fruits will actually score quite low on this because it's just naturally occurring sugars, and fruits are predominantly still water. So in terms of that sort of density of sugar in a food. So for this model, for the baseline, which is the yellow bar up there, Kiwifruit, for example, scored 0 for fat, 1 for sugar, 0 for sodium, and what was the other one I said? And there's another, and 0. So they have a baseline point of 1. The next part of the model is you look at the protein content. Well, it's a fruit, doesn't have a lot of protein in it. We don't score anything for protein. It then has a score for fruit and vegetables. And it scores 8 because it's 100% fruit and vegetables. So the reason that score is in there for other foods is that, people will say, oh, it's good, it's got a little bit of fruit in it. But if it's only got a little bit of fruit in it, that fruit contributes 10%. It's not a really great contribution. So it scores 8 for the fruit, and then it has a fibre score, and it scores 1 for that. It scores 3 for that, sorry. So the end of the nutrient profiling score is a combination of all those scores. You take your baseline score, which we scored 1, and then you take away all the other good scores. So Kiwifruit ends up with a score of -10. The threshold to be able to make a health claim is 4. So fruit scores extremely well in the system. It's quite complicated, right? You couldn't explain that easily to consumers, and the whole concept is pretty meaningless for consumers. So this is an example of an excellent tool that is great for a specific purpose, and it's great for the purpose it was designed for. But if we want to get back to something that's more suitable for ultimately consumer use and for understanding of where foods sit in this nutrient spectrum of foods, I'm going to run you through a model that's now widely used and has been developed in the US. And it's called NRF 9.3. It's a great name. So it's a nutrient-rich foods, 9.3. And you'll understand the 9.3 when you look at the next two lines. So what this model's done is it said, let's look at all the nutrients that are important and should be encouraged, and see which ones are useful. And so the model, when it was under its development and validation phase, looked a lot more widely than 9. But the conclusion from the science was you only need to look at these 9 as foods as nutrients to encourage, and then using 3 nutrients to limit in your diet, which is saturated fat, added sugar, and sodium, then this will give you a robust model for a nutrient profile score. Everything, again, is used in relation to the recommended daily intakes or the daily values. But the difference between this model and the previous model that I showed you for the fruits and vegetables is that the designers of this model said, what we don't want is foods that skew the model because they are exceptionally high in one particular nutrient. Now, I've already explained kiwifruit, for example, is a great source of vitamin C, and the kiwifruit will deliver in excess of your vitamin C. So this model potentially has the capacity to take away that advantage. But this is a validated model. This is one that has been used all around the world. No, I've got that slide a wee bit later. For validating systems for public health, for authorities and everything else like that. So in terms of robustness of science, in terms of robustness of information, I'm a firm believer in the use of validated instruments or systems that have been validated. So this is why I've looked at this system here. Also in the development, they again address, do we look at on a weight basis? Do we look at a calorific basis? And they actually, in conclusion, decided that the calorific basis was by far the most appropriate. It's an accepted measure of nutrient density around the world, and it provides a standard measure for all foods. Because this is one of the problems when you're developing models. You need standardization. You need your data to come from a robust source. You need to use the same basis for that data. And also, if you consider food packaging, most countries now require energy and nutrition labelling to be not only in a serve size or per 100 grams, but they also, you'll see a column where they have per 100 kilocalories. So doing a nutrient profile on a calorific basis was consistent with international labelling practices as well. The model was then validated against a number of, or as I said, I've already tested a number of different nutrients. And they also used serve size to consider. And because this model was developed in America, America actually has a system where it has regulated serve sizes of foods. They're not probably that relevant or used on a daily basis, but they certainly provide the regulators tools to compare things. And that's the RACC, which is the reference amount customarily consumed per eating occasion. So when I looked at this for fruits and vegetables, it was kind of a little bit of an anomaly because other than for a few fruits, such as melons, which the customarily consumed amount per eating occasion is 280 grams, lemons and cranberries is 55 grams. All other fruits were given a nominal 140 grams. So unlike other foods in the diet, it actually it wasn't as useful here. And the whole system was validated. So this is the algorithm, and it's relatively simple, and it's not entirely different to the model that I put up for the nutrient adequacy and the nutrient density. Basically, it's proportion per 100 kilocalories of the nutrients to encourage: protein, fibre, iron, calcium, magnesium, potassium, vitamin A, vitamin C, and vitamin E. And then it's the same it's deducted from that are the proportions of the nutrients to limit: saturated fat, added sugars, and sodium. This is a very nice model. It's a model that's been used. It's very useful, and it goes through there. The daily value in the algorithm up there is the DV is daily value, and MRV for the nutrients. We don't have recommended daily values of nutrients we should be limiting, by the way. We actually have maximum amounts that you shouldn't exceed. Well, in the America, they have stipulated that there. So that's a proportion of the maximum amount. And that's the model. So how useful is it? So I've actually taken this directly, as you can see, from the paper, and this gives a really nice overview of where foods sit in general using this model. Yeah, it's just nice things. And what's really nice about this is when it was done, they also used some cost measures. And this, I think, is a really nice slide to complement Professor Seidel's comments around, the accessibility and the cost of food. That plays a major role in food choice, particularly for some socioeconomic sectors of society. And down here, we see sugars, sweets, and beverages. So predominantly, we'd be looking at these beverages that are highly sweetened. The cost is nicely low, but their nutrient value is negative. Fats and oils and grains, again, all of these foods that are low cost, predominantly are nutritionally poor. It's a very, very nice explanation. As one migrates up the nutrient value, you'll see things like eggs, beans, legumes. Their cost is still proportionately low. So these are good sources of foods, but they're quite limited. And then the heroes of what should be the heroes of our diet are up there on the right-hand side. It's great that they're at the right-hand side of the nutrient-rich scale. It is unfortunate that they do also tend to be at the top of the cost per unit scale. And I think that this was a point that was made very eloquently in the previous presentation. So when we look at kiwifruit, it's important to remember, with all of this dietary stuff, it's always important to retain context, and nothing is ever black and white. Everything is a spectrum. So when we talk about fruit and we talk about the nutrient densities of different fruits, we're talking about that little circle up there. If we want to compare fruits to other foods, then it's a completely different scale. So we're the next graphs I've got are looking at where fruits sit in this model. But remember, in terms of the total diet context, it's extremely important to remember that fruit sit very firmly at that top part of the nutrient richness scale. Here we go. So this scale was developed, or this algorithm was developed, and I just did want to actually make the point that in fact it's been widely used all around the world. So yes, it's an American-based model, but it's been used in Asian countries. It was recently used in China to look at dietary patterns, to compare dietary patterns. There was a model for traditional Chinese dietary patterns. It was a sort of an official model for what people should eat. A group of researchers looked to update that, and as their reference model, they put the foods into this NRF 9.3. Because it's a validated model, it's robust. And they used that as part of the tool in China to develop Chinese dietary patterns, which are quite different to American dietary patterns, but nonetheless, this model was robust and it was a useful tool. In the Netherlands, it was also used as part of the, and I'm not sure whether Professor Seidel was involved with this, but looking at the Dutch healthy diet, and they've got an index of what's in there. This model again was used to underpin that. So I'm just really trying to sort of say, going forward, using validated models is a good way to look at data. It was used in France, and also recently in Australia, where they looked at obese adolescents. Many countries, Australia and New Zealand, are certainly not isolated in this huge trend of young people to be increasingly obese. So it was used to assess the diets in there, and also in Egypt. So this is just a very very small snippet of the utility of this model, and that it is used around the world for dietary and for dietary habit patterns. So if we look at the nutrient-rich food index on a calorific basis, remembering it caps things at 100%, and we again look at the fruits and vegetables, we see a slight evening out of the performance of fruits and vegetables. So, in terms of kiwifruit, it's not bad news. And kiwifruit are consumed as part of a healthy, balanced diet. And they perform exceptionally well in terms of nutrient profiling. You've still got oranges and strawberries up there, and this is on a calorific basis. And so there's no real shift. Oranges, as we know, and lemons, as we know, also deliver vitamin C. Melons perform quite well, and that's because they're basically water, so there's very few calories in them, or relatively few calories. Our daily dose of an apple a day to keep the doctor away doesn't perform that well, but shouldn't be negated from the diet, because a fruit diet shouldn't just consist of any one fruit either. A fruit diet should consist of a range of fruits. So this is how they look on the calorific basis. If we reduce it, we take it to a serve size, it kind of evens things out a little bit, and it changes it. So our lemons, for example, and our melons are suddenly corrected because the serve size for the melons is suddenly you have to have a large serve size. The lemons, you have a very small serve size. So you can argue that all of these models can be used to change the data to present information as how you want it. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't forget that these are validated models. These are models that are developed for consumer good, for consumer dietary patterns, and for public health reasons ultimately. And so this is a slightly different way of looking at it. These the thought processes behind nutrient profile remain, and the great news is kiwifruit continue to score really well. And this is, I just put the data together so you can see where particularly the melons and the lemons changed their, and chart title didn't come off. So that's kind of the conclusion, and this is the nutrient density part, because we can talk about nutrient density and we can talk about the value of foods. But if we don't use a model, if we don't use something that is actually definitive, then we're all talking about what we think that's on an unqualified basis. I think this, you think that. So we would never come to the same conclusion. So when we're trying to compare things, the only way you can compare it is on using a model that's based on sound principles. And I said that this nutrient NRF 9.3 was a progression in thinking, and it certainly is. Has it stopped there? No, it hasn't. Like any science, the understanding, the utility of it will continue to progress. And in recent years, nutrient profiling has actually changed yet again. And the suggestion is now that you even move away from specific foods for nutrient profiling and try and profile dietary patterns in terms of nutrient intake. And the rationale behind that is because even though diets are made up of individual foods, it's actually the dietary habit. It's the type of diets that people eat that is actually having the greatest impact on rates of non-communicable diseases. You thought nutrient profiling was complex. This type of dietary profiling is extremely complex. So it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be useful at a government level, at a health professional level, for general overview, but I don't think it will be useful entirely for consumers. It would be far too complex for consumers to use. So what can we do for consumers? I get that's the answer. At the end of the day, as a part of encouraging healthy diets and as a way of educating, companies, agencies do need to be able to communicate with consumers in a simple way as to perhaps what they should eat or should be encouraged to eat, within the context of not being encouraged to eat too much in totality. That's the other thing there. And so there's been a number of labelling systems that have been developed around the world. I'm not sure in all countries, but I've seen traffic light systems. I've seen systems where they've got, if it's a little star, only eat a lot, only eat a little bit. If it's a big star, you can have a big serve size of it. Universally, I don't know if there's been anything that's been immensely successful. Most of those systems have actually resulted in more consumer confusion than anything else. But nonetheless, the incentive is there, and as part of the tools that we can give consumers, it would be great to have a simple system. Just in thinking around these labelling systems for people, further work has been done, and it actually identified that if you've got more than 5 points or 5 concepts on any labelling system, consumers just fail to understand. They really do. So when you're looking at nutrient profiling and all the different complex calculations, for consumer communication, it's all just got to come down to 5 simple representations. It's a little bit like presentations, really, isn't it? You take away 3 points. We can stand here for an hour, but people tend to remember the 3 most important points. So as I've said, future models are going to target the totality of the diets, and that is going to be developed, and it must obviously also account in different regions for different cultural dietary patterns. So the whole concept of nutrient density and how we use this as part of a healthy, of eating patterns for healthy food is incredibly complex. So I hope that that's an appreciation that you've got from that slide. It's very easy to talk about these simple terms, but when you actually start going into the science and actually trying to quantify some of these things, the basis that you use, the algorithms that you use become immensely important. So that's the overview of the systems and everything else that's there. And I now just want to move slightly towards some of the more aspects of the NRF.3 that have been dropped and come back to, in particular, fruits and vegetables and kiwifruit. I won't flick back through them, but I did, over and above the nutrient model, if we look at some of those specific nutrients, I think this is where kiwifruit in particular, and we're here these next 2 days to talk about kiwifruit. No, don't think. I know that this is where kiwifruit are the total heroes, because kiwifruit, and we're just talking straight nutrients here, where we've got daily values, just deliver on vitamin C immensely. And I know that we've got Professor Vissers is going to talk about some of the benefits of this later on, so I'm not going into that area. But kiwifruit continue to perform. So yes, you can have a model where nutrients are capped and you go, well, maybe the kiwifruit is just sitting in that upper echelon. It is sitting in the upper echelon. But layer above that specific nutrient attributes, and you really start to see some of the benefits that go there. So this is on 100 gram, this is on a weight basis. In Europe, and I've put the European values up here, if you've got 15% of the recommended daily amounts, you can make a nutrient content claim, and there's a number of nutrient content claims around vitamin C that can be legitimately be made. So, many fruits on a 100 gram basis meet this 15% threshold easily and can make that. Kiwifruit, as you can see, deliver 100% of the 80 milligrams that's recommended. Is that what's needed? That's a further debate, a hot topic. There's many schools of thought that say that recommendations for vitamin C intakes globally are well below what they should be. So if that was to change, kiwifruit would really be outstanding there. Potassium, and you can go back to those models. Potassium was another nutrient on the recommended list, recommended to encourage. Potassium is an important electrolyte for a number of metabolic functions. And bananas are famous. Good source of potassium, good for muscle function, everything else like that. But kiwifruit also perform extremely well and can be, in many instances, attached to some of the nutrient content claims. One of the big things, and you'll see there's no recommended amounts here because that changes a wee bit, that's off the scale. It's 25 grams, so this would have looked small. So a lot of people say to me, kiwifruit are a great source of fibre. Great source of fibre. No, they're not. They're a good source of fibre as in the fruit world, but in terms of absolute values, they're not spectacular. And this opens up another whole, and the reason I'm not being critical here, I'm actually opening it up to say, because you'll hear about the fibre in kiwifruit later in this symposium, and the nice thing about this is we all treat all these nutrients, particularly things like fibre, which is not that well defined in many jurisdictions, as a general thing. Fibre's fibre. But in fact, the kiwifruit and fibre perform some incredible functions. So is it the type of fibre that's in kiwifruit as opposed to just the total fibre content? We know the fibre content in kiwifruit is one of the key contributors to some of the health benefits that are attributed to kiwifruit, But in terms of the total fibre content, we've got to remember that the fibre content is just pretty average for fruit. That it has such an effect makes us suspect that the fibre in kiwifruit is something special. So that's the nutrients as we know it. And then we come to the very, I was just looking at counting down here. We come to the more complex area. And it's completely outside nutrient density models. And the reason it's outside nutrient density models is because these models require us to measure things and compare things to amounts that we should have. And the big question is, how much of these things should we have? We know that they're in fruits and vegetables because they're called phytonutrients, which means that they're a plant source. But how much do we have? We have no idea whatsoever. Well, we do, but in terms of set amounts, it's unknown. So these phytonutrients are not included in these nutrient models. And for fruits and vegetables, they're probably incredibly important and have a number of major roles that contribute to the health benefits of fruits and vegetables. But nutrient models, as nice as they are, ignore all of these things. And so I think this is actually one of the future challenges to try and, for people in this area, to try and understand a bit more what particular, which of these phytochemicals are associated with some of the health benefits. And how much of them we need. You then get into the argument, well, should we be extracting them, like the flavonols in cocoa? So flavonols are a group of chemicals, and there's health claims that are allowed around the flavonols in cocoa. We've got lutein in tomatoes and carotenoids in oranges and fruits. There's a whole range of these things, and some of them have some attributed health benefits to them, but how much and everything else. So it's a difficult area, but not one to be ignored at all. And vitamins and minerals, fats, proteins, those concepts are hard enough to, that are complex. You then start looking at the various phytonutrients and this is by no means comprehensive. This is just a lot of these names are just sort of names of groups of chemicals. So, it would have been illegible. We know in kiwifruit, for example, that we've got a range of really important phytonutrients, the chlorophylls. And you might go, well, gold kiwifruit doesn't have any chlorophyll in it. Actually, it does, and often gold kiwifruit has more chlorophyll, which is green, than green kiwifruit. It's just that the other colours in the gold kiwifruit mask the chlorophyll. So, you look at something and you go, well, that's yellow, it must only have carotenoids in it. It's not necessarily the case. They also have a range of polyphenols. Compared to some fruits and vegetables, the total phenolic range content of kiwifruit is relatively low. But if the polyphenols that are in kiwifruit are particularly potent or are particularly special, they may actually afford quite an important mechanism that contributes to the health benefits. And then carotenoids. So that's just a very, very quick overview. And it kind of, the idea of this is to say, well, we've got the nutrient profiling, we can do all this thing, but fruits and vegetables contain all these other things that in terms of models and in public health recommendations and dietary recommendations are often overlooked because it becomes so complex. This is a very, very brief overview of some examples of some foods, Haven't put kiwifruit on there. Anthocyanins, which are typically your blue-red colours, they've been attributed with a number of these health outcomes or health benefits. Well, they're kind of markers, really. They're not a health outcome in themselves. Induction of apoptosis, that's actually just helps to regulate programmed cell death. Hardly an attractive health benefit, but does have an impact in some metabolic conditions that will have a health outcome. So this is an overview. And as we delve down into this, as I've said, it just becomes increasingly complex. It becomes increasingly difficult to know what's doing what and what's attributed to a health benefit, particularly for whole foods. But there is some indications there. So that's kind of the end of it. I've given you an overview of nutrient profiling, fruits and vegetables, where they sit in the spectrum of foods, and particularly in foods for good health. How these can be measured, and measured in a validated way. And at the end of the day, all of these things are quite important for making sure that in terms of lifestyle, there's an adequate energy intake. That's a critical thing. If you've got if you're a super sportsman, you need a lot more energy than someone that's sedentary to maintain good health. So, a balanced diet that's appropriate for your lifestyle, and everyone has different lifestyles, well, there's a range of different lifestyles, is absolutely critical. Within that diet, it's not just one food. It's not a perturbation of the diet just to consume, only fruits or only vegetables. Diets need to be balanced, and they need to be balanced to ensure that an adequate and a wide enough range of nutrients is delivered. And as a part of those diets, we want to ensure that the food is nutrient rich, preferably has a low energy dense nature to it, and fruits and vegetables as a part of the healthy diet deliver on those on those needs. I also put in there, and again this was mentioned by Professor Seidel, fruits and vegetables that are minimally processed. So you had your smoothies out the back, and having just had a big talk on sugary drinks and fruit juices and things like that, what was really interesting is that wasn't the smoothies that you had are minimally processed. They're just basically munched up fruit and vegetables. Pretty much by the time they've been in your mouth, they would have looked like that anyway. So I'm not sort of talking about freshly prepared things like smoothies, but they fall under that minimally processed amount. So fruit and vegetables, some processing is fine, but it's when they're split to bits, like fruit juices. I'm not sure how many technologists are here, but many fruit juices, for example, are split into the components and then reassembled. And people are often stunned at that, and they go, well, every time you buy that brand and that flavour of fresh juice, it tastes exactly the same, right? And they go, yes. And that's because they take out most of the water, they take out most of the acids, to some extent they concentrate up the sugars, and then they standardise it. So you, as a consumer, get exactly what you want. You get exactly the same flavour with exactly the same amount of acids in it to ensure that you want to drink more than you actually need, and you're left with a slightly dry throat at the back of it. Sorry, it's very sceptical about fruit juice. And so it's far removed from the smoothie that was just munched up, or the fruit juice you might make in your house by squeezing freshness. So there is a role for minimally processed fruit and vegetables in this diet for a healthy lifestyle. And minimally processing fruit and vegetables is one way of delivering convenience, and Professor Seidel talked about that. So in summary then, fruit consistently score highly in nutrient profiling systems. Kiwifruit in particular outperforms most fruit, and this is just great news. That is related to its high vitamin C content. You can't go past that. Other nutrients such as the potassium, vitamin E, also contribute to it. Obviously, it's low in fat. Often people will say, oh, but you've got oil in the seeds. When fruit is eaten whole, like kiwifruit, most of the seeds pass through the gastrointestinal tract intact. So even though the nutrient values the nutrient composition tables will include the oil in there, and from a digestive perspective, it's often a little bit different. And we can't go past the fact that fruit and vegetables, and kiwifruit included, also have this natural range of phytonutrients in there. And they all contribute to a balanced, healthy diet. Thank you.